Okay, looks like we're ready to start. I hope you are all having a great global conference this year. 2016 has been fantastic. Lots of great conversations and discussions and lots of broad topics. And I guess we're very lucky to do this on the last day because, we're going to have some interactive conversations, friendly conversations, and I want to make this, also inclusive of the audience as well. So at the end of it, there will be a Q&A session, so if you just raise your hands, we'll get a microphone to you. But we also have a very sexy topic, if I do say so myself. It's not about systemic risk, which is important, but hard to articulate. We're talking about a trend and a topic that really relates to everybody, since everybody shops. You have to buy something, whether it's clothes, whether it's utilities, whether it's appliances. And it's a whole changing landscape at this point. There are so many factors at play, whether it's changing trends, economic headwinds, disruption when it comes to technology. Lots to discuss. And I'm so lucky today to be joined by individuals from all different walks of retail, whether it's resorts with Sonu, whether it's Barney's with the brick and mortars, or we also have a trend forecaster, Christoph, here with us today. Lyndon Lee, do I need to introduce you? You've done so well with Lion Capital. All Saints, he owns All Saints. He sold Jimmy Choo's, among some of the brand names that he's held in his portfolio. And also right next to me, Grupo Group of Brazil, which is one of the largest cosmetics retailers in Brazil and in emerging markets. So we have so much to discuss from all different regions of the world. So I just want to set the scene first off and just talk about what you're seeing right now in terms of retail, good or bad, and what keeps you up at night. Let's start with you, Lyndon.
I think the biggest thing for me in retail today is the emergence of the millennial consumer. This is a consumer that's grown up in a very different world to Gen X and the baby boomers. Purchasing goods means something very different to the millennial consumer. It's also the most informed consumer that we've ever seen in the history of our planet. There's no ability to market to the millennial, in my view. They have a quest for authenticity, for discovery, for experiences, which is dramatically different from Gen X. So, talking to them is not as straightforward as it has been in the world of consumer in the past. You don't have the right to talk to them. They will allow you if you have an authentic message that's applicable to them. So for me, that flows through everything we see from brick and mortar and the experience that we have to provide in that environment through to digital, which obviously I think from our perspective, stores are basically in a inextricable decline, and digital obviously is in a double-digit growth. That will at some point bottom out, but not in the foreseeable future. Mm-hmm. So for me, again, millennial authenticity, I think it connects also globally. So as much as we have a more emerging consumer, so in China, in India, I think still when you get into the depths of those markets, you're still seeing exactly the same trend. Mm-hmm. Even though they may be, at a younger stage in terms of their cycle of consumption, you're still seeing that millennial customer come to the forefront, and even in those markets is demanding this authentic message.
Authenticity
is the key.
Guilherme, do you sleep much these days?
Thanks for having me on the panel. First of all, it's great to be here. I think Brazil, what keeps me up at night is the economic landscape in Brazil, and of course political environment that probably many of you have heard about. What keeps me going is the hope that we're bringing beauty and really serving a lot of the Brazilian consumers. About 1/3 of the Brazilian families at some point during a year they go to one of our stores. We have 4,000 stores in Brazil, so it's great to be part of the Brazil that is really try to make a difference. In terms of consumption trends, I agree that millennials are a big one. Digital and digital not in the sense that we're probably going to be seeing a lot of online sales. I feel that digital has really changed the way we have physical stores because, as Lyndon said, I think consumers get to our stores. At that point, it's no more the beginning of the journey. they have done so much research before. So when they go to our stores, they know what they want. They really understand that, and they use bloggers and all different kind of digital influencers to get to this point. In terms of Brazil specifically, we had so much growth in the last 10 years. We were growing 11% overall as a market. Our company around 25%. And I think unfortunately we're probably going to see 5 to 10 years they're going to be very rough, at least 2 or 3. And I know that even the exchange rate impacts our costs. But on the other hand, I think impacts even Daniel that Brazilians used to be one of the largest consumers outside Brazil, right? And but I'm still optimistic. I feel we just have to play a different game. And but I hope some of the change that we are expecting in Brazil and some of the reforms are going to come up very, very soon.
Okay, well, since you pointed to Daniela, why don't we talk about bricks and mortars?
Thank you for having me. Changing landscape is underestimated because it is really evolving so fast. I mean, we are, as a company, we don't really look at it in terms of physical stores and digital. Actually, it's a fully integrated strategy. Our physical stores are actually quite stable. And I think one of the reasons that our physical stores are quite stable is that we really focus on what we do and what we do well. In our physical stores, the experience is very much a part of why the consumer is actually going to the store. They want a social experience, and we want to make sure that when someone is crossing that threshold, that there's curated merchandise, that there's a food and beverage component, that there's services. So it is a very, it's an incredible experience. And the digital one is the same. And we want to make sure that Barneys really stays true to Barneys. And I think that's why certainly there are headwinds. Certainly the currency situation is a disaster for us. You cannot predict, and if someone could figure that out for me, I'd be very happy. What the currency how that will affect your business. Some years, obviously, it's good, and other years it's not. So we have to focus on our core customer, and how do we also get that aspirational consumer to start spending with us. And I think that you talked about authenticity. I think that is one of the big problems in retail today, is that there are too many people trying to be everything to all consumers. You cannot, that's not sustainable. And that, I think, is one of the reasons that we are more stable and as far as we can see and are growing, is because we know our customers so incredibly well, and what we do is for our customer. And I think we forgot that along the way a little bit. I always say, did anyone actually ask the customer? So I think we feel like we're in a great position, but the strategy is fully integrated between on and offline. And that customer, that online customer is also really shopping in our physical stores. That the customer who's shopping both is actually the one that's growing the fastest for us. So that says something. It's not they're not making a choice either or. They're really choosing to do both, because if you do it well, they will choose both.
I actually concur with what you're saying. It's interesting to see some of the digital brands, so digital retail brands like Net-a-Porter. They've now brought out a magazine, a hard magazine called Porter. Speaking with Justine Picardy from Harper's Bazaar, UK, she was saying that actually their hard copy issues of Harper's Bazaar have actually grown considerably. So it is a combination of both, and I think it's using digital to support
Completely agree. We did something similar where we actually launched The Window, which is an editorial lifestyle site that works with our commerce platform, and we actually launched a print edition 2 years ago. So digital informing print, and it's been enormously successful.
Yeah, well, we'll delve more into digital. I mean, that's a topic that can just go in so many directions.
I like what you're saying about the experience, bringing the experience into retail. And it's good to ask the consumer, but I think Steve Jobs never asked the consumer, and we've ended up with some incredible innovations. And I wonder if there's an opportunity as well for a retailer like Barneys to make a sort of a step leap that the consumer couldn't even imagine was possible in retail. Are you thinking about those?
In the Maldives.
No, but on a retail
Barneys
experience side, yeah. But I think if you'd like me to carry on and what's keeping me up,
yes.
so I'm sort of kept up, but normally with excitement, because I think there's lots of opportunities. We're living in an amazing age with continuous change, and there are opportunities. And from our side, what we found in resorts and leisure is that traditionally our customers were European and Americans, and in spite of all the digital evolution that's happened in, I think the first mobile phone was in Sweden. It's the largest density of mobile phones, the digital age, etc., the evolution of the internet in the US. Funny enough, the American and the European consumers are still at the very, very high end, still very dependent on their travel advisor. So 90% of our sales are through the travel advisor. And that's quite easy to communicate, because we create very unique experiences. You get the travel advisor to come and visit us, they're blown away, and then they go and communicate that. What we found, though, is a growing part of our business, which is now sometimes up to 40 to 50% of our markets in the destinations that we operate in, is your Asians. And they're just totally digitally orientated. They make their decisions entirely online. And when you go to China, it's incredible how sophisticated they are. I mean, I sort of tell my team that sometimes, once you go and live in China for a couple of months, just to understand how the world will be in 5 years, from the point of using digital technology, whether it's WeChat or other things. But there are now a lot of opportunities to try and create that experience through technology, like virtual reality. So there's one Chinese tour operator who doesn't have a brochure. They're entirely, or a digital brochure, they're just entirely virtual reality films. And so they go around, they have 100 resorts which they're promoting to their clients, and they go and do these virtual reality films. Their clients have goggles. They put their phone in the goggle, and you see this experience. So I think that's a huge opportunity,
right,
especially for us in the experience business. It's a great way of communicating that
different
experience.
ways of marketing.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move it down here to Christophe, since we were talking about forecasting trends. Daniela says she wished she could see the collapse in certain currencies coming. How do you see the future?
Well, it's quite interesting that Daniela was talking about integrated marketing, because I think this is one of the big things, which is consumers do not care anymore whether it's online or in stores. There's no such thing as people going completely digital, for some people in some cases, or not. And if you take the Chinese consumer, who is very advanced in this respect, what you find on the one hand is a number of digital trends emerging, where it's all about human interaction online. So it's something that is very much ingrained in a kind of Chinese consumer, how to converse before making a purchase. There's also a huge opportunity around making the interaction more and more emotional, which is one of our trends that we are beginning to see very much. We call the warming web, which is people increasingly want not just a human interaction online, but they want something far more emotional. And we see the Chinese at the forefront of that. At the same time, if you take the Chinese consumer, for example, Chinese consumers still love shopping for fun.
Right.
So, and there's a huge proportion of them doing so.
But that assumes that the Chinese consumer is still shopping.
Exactly.
Is that still the case?
Yes, and they do both. And what is interesting about the Chinese consumer, actually, now we're talking about it.
Just to touch on that, I think the decline in luxury sales in China was largely to do with the corruption, the anti-corruption bloc. So, of course, a lot of luxury sales were people buying a handbag, a bag, or a bottle of wine or whatever to a government official. Now, all of that business is gone, but the consumers are still buying, yes. I think.
They're absolutely buying. And there's something very particular to the Chinese, and particularly Chinese, but India as well, so emerging markets, is the fact that people are much more likely to shop in couples rather than on their own. So something to think about, luxury brands like yours, is how to target people. Do you target women or men, depending on what they do, or do you actually think, well, we could target couples? Mm-hmm. Another thing I would like to talk about briefly about millennials. You were talking about millennials. Is a number of things. Why you were saying that actually trends tend to pop up everywhere, more or less at the same time, and it's completely true. Maybe not at the same time, but very, very quickly, yeah. we see that a trend, we don't even know where the trend emerged from in the first place, and this is very strong. And in terms of millennials, is very much the same. And we find lots of similarities across the world, amongst middle classes, of course. But at the same time, I think it's really important to recognize some of the differences. For instance, what we found, because we track a lot of attitudes, year on year, is how quickly young Chinese are changing compared with, for example, young Indians or young Brazilians. And that is an incredible shift that I was looking at actually quite recently, which is the shift from being very materialistic to, in a way, the rejection of what is very conspicuous very quickly. And we're seeing that emerging. And actually, we're seeing the kind of emergence of no logo amongst young Chinese. And actually, I can see that from the data. I can see that from our trend spotters around the world. But also, I can see that for myself because I've got a number of Chinese employees. And actually, one of them told me recently, we're coming out, she's a young analyst, she's like 20-something. We came out of the meeting with clients, and she said, Christophe, I need to tell you something. And I said, well, what is it? She said, I'm very, very rich. And so I was kind of like,
and
what?
She whispered that?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. But, and it is true, but if you saw her, what she wears, there's no logo, there's nothing that you could associate with at least conspicuous wealth. So I can see it from all angles, really.
In China.
She lives in London.
I see.
She's in my she's in my.
But do you see a difference in, because I mean China's a huge country. It's a billion people, the width of twice the width of Europe or whatever. So to sort of define a sort of Brit and a German in the same sentence is difficult. And in a way, I've certainly witnessed that in China. When you go to Shanghai and Beijing, you see a different perspective of consumer and attitude and sophistication than you might in Chongqing or Guangzhou, or actually Guangzhou is a little bit more sophisticated, but some of these other cities. If you think about it, China has about 14 cities which each have populations of 10 million or more. So it's difficult to generalize, or do you think that's a general trend happening throughout China, or is that more just Shanghai and Beijing?
I mean, basically, Shanghai, especially Shanghai, is the forefront of these emerging trends, of course. But what we find is when we look at different tiers within China is that the rest is catching up very quickly. So the idea that young Chinese are changing only in these major cities we know about is true up to a point, because there is a change, and a very rapid change. And it's very interesting. I mean, I'm talking about the Chinese consumer here because I've been struck by how in 5 years' time, they went from being, the kind of purely materialistic of saying, well, what is luxury? It is driving an expensive car, to something much more understated. And it's still a minority, so don't get me wrong, it's not like China is in general, but we are seeing this trend emerging and changing very quickly.
But is it all about China? Is it all about China? Because I feel like that's the focus when we talk about shopping and retail.
Of course not.
It's
of
not.
Course not. We are talking about, I'm talking here about middle class, relatively affluent Chinese.
Right.
I'm not talking about, far poorer people in China, which we don't even talk to really, because we
But even amongst the middle class, I think it's interesting. There's that Chinese brand, Shangxia. It's a joint venture between Hermes and Jiang Qiong'e, who's a former Hermes employee. And her whole brand is all about celebrating Chinese quality. So if you go into Shangxia, you'll see that the quality of products are as good as in Hermes, if not better. It's Chinese craftsmanship, and she's celebrating that. Her prices are the equal as if you go into Hermes. But the interesting thing is that her shop in Shanghai has quadrupled in size. She has this huge shop now. It's like almost a block, almost like Barney's. And in terms of size, one of these big things. And Beijing's slightly smaller. She doesn't have any other shops in other cities in China. Her third shop's actually in Paris. So, from her perspective, she doesn't quite see the Chinese consumer valuing, in these other cities, valuing China and Chinese goods as much as they value foreign goods. So in Shanghai and Beijing, they've got over that, and they said, well, look, if the item's good, we'll buy it, and so much the better if it's Chinese. Whereas in some of these other cities, it's still not that sophisticated. They're buying a brand because it's foreign.
If I want to jump on that, I think Brazil specifically, we have a huge amount of local brands in beauty, right? So if you got fragrances, for example, 60% of the market is the two main brands. So O Boticário, there's my organization, Natura, there's also Brazilian. I think if you see the Chinese market for the same category, is around. So it's like Chanel is number 1, LVMH is number 2. So I agree that the trend might be changing, but I still feel the Chinese are very different from Brazilians, for example.
Right, and Indians as well are like the Brazilians.
Exactly.
They're celebrating their own brands.
Yeah, like let's say
Shama, Yuja, or whatever, and all these domestic.
So like 95% of sales in retail in Brazil for beauty are mass market. So usually local brands that they really talk to the people and brands that really resonate to the Brazilian consumers. The second thought that I want to say is just, you mentioned about like channels and different things. I think we as retail companies have to decide if we want to speak the language of channel or consumer. I feel that we ourselves still have, head of own companies, head of franchising, head of like direct sales, head of e-commerce. I think the future is really about you have one consumer. And we really have to see she or her, or he, how that consumer really wants to interact with your company. And of course comes digital and all the things. But I think there's an organization structure problem that we still see channels, not the consumer.
When I came to Barney's, if you had asked me on day one, I would have said, I'm hiring all these people for e-commerce, all new merchants, everyone, and realized that was the wrong way to go, because the consumer wants consistency. Exactly. They want to make sure that when they're looking online and they're in the Madison Avenue store, that the experience is the same. You have two different teams, never going to happen. And I think a lot of omni-channel retailers in America did just that, and now are trying to work quickly to get it back to one team, because it's too inconsistent. And just speaking to the Chinese consumer, just the trend, we're seeing a huge increase in business from the Chinese consumer, which did not exist for us at all. In fact, we were always, sort of perplexed why we didn't have this huge growth of Chinese customer like all of the other retailers in America. But I think you're right. We're not a heavily logoed store. We are more subtle, we are more rare, we are more exclusive. Our big brands are not the big brands that you would think of. And I think they're responding to that.
Right.
Not as much online, but more in the physical store also, which I think is interesting.
So let me just I just want to make that point clear. So are you saying that the Chinese, they don't shop at Barney's because you don't have the big Gucci logos, the big flashy
Well, they are shopping
furs?
now. They are shopping now. So I do think that they're looking for things that are a little bit more rare and a little bit more exclusive, and a more discerning sort of view on luxury.
Well, I just want to bring in Lyndon here on Asia, because he did things a little different when you got into Korea, when you got into Japan, because you didn't go through the franchising route. You went direct, which is almost unheard of.
I think one of the, I really like what you were saying about the, in terms of trends, because I think one of the things we have to be wary of is taking a photograph at a point in time and saying this is how the world works. And I think whether it's entering Asia or whether it's digital, physical, I think there's a tendency to say Indian consumers look at it this way, Chinese consumers look at it this way. I think equally, you could say affluent customers look at it this way, people in more developing, less affluent regions look at it a different way. I think what is clear, though, out of all of this is that with the access to information, which is digital effectively, whether it's shopping digital or not, but with the access to information comes almost a democratization of these trends. And I think the underlying trends are global trends. I strongly believe that it may be a year later in this region of India, it may be a year earlier in this part of New York. Look at London. Things aren't accepted equally across one city. It's a different pace of change in different parts. We talk about stores. You have Harrods presence in London, but no Harrods presence in Glasgow. But there's an affluence explanation for that. But I think we are seeing at an unprecedented rate this access to information, which creates underlying trends which are similar, whether it's in Korea or whether it's in the States or the UK. So from our perspective, what we can control, because we'll all have different views on which tactic's going to work today to speak to this consumer, and we'll get our data, and we may even interpret the same data differently. But what we can control is brand. And so from our point of view, when we looked at Asia, and I think in fairness, we couldn't have done this 10, 15 years ago, In fact, I remember when, in 2004, I bought Jimmy Choo when it was still a fairly unknown brand, and I took it into Japan. There's no way in 2004 I could have done that direct. I mean, I went in partnership with Bluebell and we launched Japan. It was very successful. Today, just 2 months ago, I launched Japan direct for All Saints. That's very different in a space of a little over 10 years. And I did that because we want a controlled brand, and also we want the consumer to have the same experience. We want our consumer. I've seen so many business plans of companies, where they've done very well in Asia historically. They've done a franchise or a joint venture or whatever. And I've looked at these plans and it's growing to the moon. And I say, there's one shoe company in particular, which I won't name, that was recently sold. And I said, this is not going to work. And they said, of course it's going to work. We've done more in Asia than anybody. We know we've got the best local partner. We've got this. I said, yeah, but I was in your store in Taiwan last week or 2 weeks ago, and I'm in New York today, and the same shoe, the price is more than double. And you can fool them for a certain period of time, but I think one of the pushbacks in luxury in China has not just been about corruption. The millennial consumer in particular, who knows the technology, says,
I'm not
bugger
paying
off.
30% more in China.
No, it's not 30%.
Yeah.
30% they'll pay. 20, 30 they'll pay because there's duties, there's import,
Yeah.
there's all, but it's double. And we don't want that with our brand because once you've lost that consumer, once you've offended them in that way, you don't get them back. So I wanted to control that experience in Korea. Our index to the UK is probably in the 15 to 20% premium range, which is very different than our competitive set. If you comp us to a similar business in the UK, we'll be within 10-15%. In Korea, they'll be like almost double our price. And it's putting us in a different mindset in terms of that consumer in the market and our peer group. And we control the experience, we control the brand, and we don't piss off the millennial.
Which is important. That's the argument why Apple sells as many iPhones as they do in China, because there's price transparency. If you buy that iPhone in China, it's the same price you're paying in the US, or if you're paying what you're paying in Europe and around the rest of the world. So this leads me to my question about pricing. PwC recently launched a retail survey, and they said pricing probably matters 61% of the time when it comes to someone making a decision whether or not to buy this product. So in your world, how much does pricing matter still?
Yeah, I think that's nonsense.
Price doesn't matter?
No, price matters. Price matters hugely. And I think, again, a reason for the pushback on luxury is access to information. The consumer knows. They don't know to this level of detail, but some of my All Saints product are produced in the same factory as Burberry. The fabrics, same fabrics. My price point, way lower because my margins are lower. And okay, they don't know that level of granularity, but they're increasingly sophisticated where they can identify, it may be that I want to shop luxury, maybe apart from the ultra high net worth, but for most of us, even if we can afford it, we want to know that we're getting an appropriate value for what we're paying. Even if I'm shopping luxury, I want to know that I'm getting value. I'm not just going to pay for the logo of the brand anymore. I want to see the underlying quality. So I think price absolutely matters. Price in relation to proposition. The consumer needs to connect those two.
But then I completely agree. But the problem, there's two problems. One is in America, the consumer has basically been taught that
I agree.
They can buy something on sale at some point during the course of the year. We have actually exited brands because we did not want to follow their markdown cadence. So they're gone from the store. Because we are not, and I agree with you, people say, oh, but your things are so expensive. No, they're priced appropriately for what the product is. And we actually respect the integrity of the product, and we are not going to be on markdown 10 months out of the year. Not going to happen.
So
and
that's a really smart.
It's not sustainable.
Right.
And that's what I think is part of the problem.
America's one of the toughest markets globally because of how the consumer has been educated. And it's 40-50% of the time, 40-50% of sales for the average brand is on promotion or on discount. And that's pretty challenging. You go to, again, won't name names, but it's taken me about 10 years to sort of understand this market. But you go into big department stores and you'll find what are supposed to be high-end brands strewn on tables. I mean, lying on the floor. Just, I mean, it looks like a bazaar sale or something, you know. And it's, I'm thinking, you know, from a European perspective, this is very confusing to me how you can have such high-end brands. So I don't want to sell there,
Right.
because I don't want that to happen to my
So,
brand.
Nu, don't you charge four figures
Sorry,
a
just
night
to-
for your
But,
resorts?
and I think I think this whole point on discounting, it's so easy to get into this whole approach, and especially when you have a team of salespeople, it's very easy to you sit in a conversation, you hear them, and all they're talking about, okay, business is down, how do we stimulate business? Let's do an offer, stay 7, pay 5, or whatever. And recently, at every call that I've been on, I've said I don't want to hear any conversation about offers, because you're focusing in the wrong direction. It's all about the experience, and because if you're focusing on the offer, you forget about communicating the experience. And I think there is an opportunity, like you've demonstrated at Barney's, obviously, where if you communicate the experience, people will pay that, and that's the opportunity. If sales are down, the opportunity is really to think about, well, what is happening? What experiences do we have there? You know, we might have a famous share for astronomer like Buzz Aldrin, whatever. Let's communicate that, because that's what's going to get people to go. It's not the offer. People are also sometimes jaded with offers. There's just so many offers around all the time that's just it doesn't register anymore. Whereas if you sort of communicate an interesting experience, they'll say, oh, that's happening, and perhaps I should go there rather than the competitor. So that's my view on that particular point. But I sort of interrupted you. Did you have another question?
Is that part of your brand protection as well, where you refuse to discount?
We do have offers through our wholesalers, but we're more and more limiting that. And certainly directly, it's not. It's all about, you know, communicating the experience, and that's what I've been trying to drive with the team. Is you know, Easter, for example, rather than saying, okay, we're not quite full for Easter, well, what is the content? Who are the interesting people coming to create that? So, so I think it's about, and I think the more and more we can communicate the experience, the more that will attract people. And I think that's going to be more important. And it's refreshing to hear what you say about China. And funny enough, in India, your Indian consumer is always very much price-driven, offer-driven. You know, the Indian always wants his bargain. But I think more and more they're buying into the experience, and they're having to pay for that.
Yeah. So Guilherme, what about in Brazil with such tough economic times? Does Grupo feel that there's a need to discount in bulk?
I think for me it's quite different from Barney's and, you know, other premium brands. We're talking about like 4,000 stores, you know, millions of customers, and our competitors are basically Natura and Avon. They are in the direct sales, and that's a very rough market for pricing strategy, right? So Avon has probably, you know, have 40% of the portfolio in Brazil at a discount, and that really damaged their brand. So they lost, I think, 4% market share in the last 4 or 5 years, and they're in a cycle that they cannot get out of. In terms of our strategies, we have a value strategy, so we really don't care about volume. You know, of course, I'm exaggerating that, but we care about margins. So we try not to get to this price competition. So probably like 15% of our portfolio is at discount now. So it's much less than the competitors. And just one point to the luxury business. I remember you mentioned about double price. So I was raised and born in Brazil, born and raised in Brazil. And in the US, I always came here and went to like Barney's, these kind of stores. And so they joke that in Brazil, like luxury competition is not in Brazil, it's in New York and London. So people have to come outside to make this purchase. It might change, but it's so expensive, you know, to have luxury in Brazil. So many people just wait the time to go abroad and have the chance to buy something at a discount.
But also in difficult economic times, it's also, some would say, you know, a strategic time to also build and grow market share.
That's right. I feel we've been debating that a lot with the board. Our call now is to at least maintain market share, but not have lower margin. We have a debate if that's the right or not the right strategy, but I feel that, you know, maybe what Barney's did before, we don't want to, you know, we have, I don't know, like 70 million customers. So we rather stay with that number, with the little higher margins, they get to a price war with the two main competitors. That is not going to be a good strategy. Although
I think is 100% right.
Yeah.
And we're in the same. We just had, yes, last year was a complicated year at retail, but we had the best margin rate in the history of the company.
Which was?
Well,
Are we open
good
to sharing?
try, good try. No.
Same for us. I mean, we have very high margins. EBITDA margins are one of the largest, highest in the world, and so I think that's probably the right strategy. But one thing that is really challenging for us at this time is we have like 1/3 of our cost base indexed to dollar, and we had like a 40-50% devaluation the last year or so. So it's really hard how to really it's about like getting efficiency in the corporate world, getting more efficient stores, but it's really hard not to get some price raise at some point. But we are trying to hold up in this strategy.
Yeah.
Can I make a few points actually, because it's very interesting. Your strategy is very interesting and clearly it's working very well. But I see a number of trends that might disrupt your strategies in the future. And I'd like to kind of see how you respond to that actually. The first one is that increasingly people do not want to pay full price for products and services. That's clear. We see it increasing all the time simply because it's becoming easier with the internet. Okay, so that's number one. So people's expectations.
Full price, what do you mean about it?
Yeah, so basically the idea is when you ask people, are you prepared to pay full price for premium services or premium products? We've seen over time the proportion of people saying yes going right down. That's the first point.
Yeah.
Why? Because it's becoming easier. The second element is simply the future and algorithms. So algorithms that with at your fingertips allow you to find the best product at the best price. So that's the second element, and that is already happening. There's University of Oxford in Britain. They've created this algorithm that searches through I think it's 3 million phone tariffs in the UK, and based on your statements, that picks the right tariff for you. So it's very emerging, but can you imagine how this is going to change in the future? The third element is that is the kind of the slow trend, and I think we shouldn't make too much of it towards, but it's still significant towards personalized pricing. So as an individual, based on how I've interacted with this particular company in the past and my profile and so on, price become much more personalized. So the one price for all becomes much more difficult to sustain. So my question to you is your strategy is working very well, but how are you going to respond to this in the future? Are you going to have to change it because people's expectations and the technology is going to make it more difficult for you?
I mean, I think you were talking before about the strategy of the brands to have they need a global pricing strategy. And if brands are not going to protect that, then we are going to have a problem, absolutely. But hopefully, we're trying to educate people that this is becoming more and more of a reality. And to be also clear, we do discount. We do have a sale period twice a year, and they're very successful. So there is some element of discounting, and there is an element of a customer who is just a sale customer, and we're happy to service them. But I think more and more we're trying, and especially with these small sort of nascent brands, trying to really get them to think more globally to make sure that there's not 5 different prices all over the world and somebody's going to make the choice based on price, which is a mistake. And in terms of the
answer is brand though, because
I agree.
I mean, I remember when I bought All Saints, it was 24 hours before filing bankruptcy. It was in a cycle of discounting. And it was discounted because it needed the cash, and I bought the business, and just overnight we literally just stopped the discount mentality. And you should have seen some of the online chatter about it. The prices, why aren't you putting on sale? And I mean, there was some really venomous messages. But I just closed my eyes, crossed my fingers, and waited to see how far sales dropped. And fortunately, I mean, they dropped, but it dropped probably about 7%. But what happened is my margin structure went from 52 gross margin up to 65 in literally months. And that made all the difference from a cash flow negative business to a cash flow positive business. And so at this point, I protect brand. We have to respond to the market to a degree. We have, there are sale periods, and we have to, and we also use it for clearance, of course. But the philosophy has to be that, you know what, you can't find me on discount. Now, in the case of All Saints, it's a little easier because it's all 100% owned retail. So we don't have to have
you
the
don't
wholesale channel.
wholesale
We don't
anymore?
wholesale. We just started a line of bags, which we're going to do wholesale, but other than that, we don't wholesale. So it makes it a lot easier. It's more difficult when we have businesses like John Varvatos, which have a mix of wholesale and retail, because that creates some channel conflicts in terms of
I think to
discount.
answer your point on personalized pricing and discounts, what we do is we throw in some value adds. Because I think consumers like recognition. So at least they feel that they're getting something, but it's not necessarily a price discount. It could be because you're a great diver or whatever, and you've been diving a lot, free diving with Ken, our free diver for a week, or because you're celebrating something, a beautiful dinner on the sandbank. So those are the sort of things we might throw in for clients at the time, at the spot of booking.
That might work very well. Basically, it's rewarding loyalty and understanding of your consumers, so it's very good as well. But if you think about it, is a discount in a sense that what people get is actually at a lower price than they would get otherwise. So you can think of it in that way as well, in a way.
But if you're personalizing, so we talked about this before, that personalization now is 22% of our business in terms of content and commerce, and that's been an incredible return on investment for us. So if you are curating whatever they're reading, whatever the email they're opening, based on their algorithms and based on algorithms and their shopping patterns, you're not going to show them a $30,000 bracelet if all they've been buying from you is lipstick and denim, right? I mean, isn't that what it's more about rather than sort of personalized pricing? That it is more, how do you show them, again, what they, based on their shopping patterns, what they're really interested in, which may be price-based. You're right. Not everybody at Barney's is spending $30,000. We have an aspirational consumer.
What you're saying, I think the example you gave of algorithms was a commodity. It was a phone call. So phone call's a commodity. I can understand for those sort of things, algorithms finding you the cheapest way to call, valid. But I think exactly as you're saying there, when it's a very high-end luxury experience, it's all about using algorithms to actually tailor the experience you give to the guest.
Yeah, I feel that for me, it's personalized offering and experience. I strongly believe that Brazil is doing baby steps for consumer insights, big data, all these kind of things. And I agree with Lyndon that probably we have the same trends, we're just like a few years behind. But in a search of is an advantage for us at some point, right? Because we just can look outside and see what's happening abroad, and somehow we just learn with the mistakes and try to do it in Brazil. But I feel that we have to heavily invest in really understand the consumer.
Right.
And that means that could even mean that you have a different pricing strategy, but it's really about the brands you're going to offer them. We have 4 different businesses, right? So we have from very mass business to more premium businesses. So, I mean, we still don't share information across the different businesses. Must be so, it sounds very, oh my God.
Or you do?
We do not.
You do not.
So I feel that if we start doing that in the future, we can understand, across the different channels, across the different brands, which offering that consumer needs. And pricing for me is just one pillar of that journey.
Makes sense. It's a very engaged conversation, energetic, and I want to make this inclusive. So at this point, I want to, if anybody has a question in the audience, wow, this is very interactive. Okay, let's get a microphone over here first.
Right, good.
Hi, my name is Coral Chung, and I'm actually an entrepreneur starting a luxury brand targeting the millennial professional. Thank you all for sharing your perspectives. It was such an engaging discussion. So my question is around, actually one of the panels yesterday was John Scully, and he was talking about how brands have really changed, and the idea that the brand represents credibility is very different now than before. I would love to get your perspectives on that. Is marketing all about communicating with that individual millennial consumer, or is protecting the brand and communicating that brand story still very critical?
Who wants to take that?
Can I?
Go ahead.
Yeah. I think our sort of experience and our dilemma is it's a combination of both, because The crux of Soneva is to, I believe quite strongly that when you can create apparent opposites, business success comes. When you merge apparent opposites so they feel like a glue and they're working together, that's when you get real business success. And so for us, it's the opposites that we've merged is sustainability, luxury, and wellness. So we offer our guests luxuries, but minimize our impact on the planet and enhance their health. And what we've actually found is that it's a great core purpose, and I also strongly believe that companies in the 21st century have to have a core purpose beyond just enriching shareholders. So we need to go back to sort of pre-1920s, you know, Dodge against Ford. Henry Ford wanted to build more factories because if he built more factories, he'd have more employees would buy his cars, and that was a sort of virtuous sort of vision, and he sort of referred to his company as an instrument of service, not a money-making machine. And the Dodge brothers wanted more dividends, not factories, and they won the case, and you know, things have changed. But I think in the 21st century, companies have to have a purpose beyond just enriching shareholders and paying employees a salary, and that can be very engaging for the employee, and that's how you get, especially in our business, hospitality, very high-end, high-quality service, magical service. You can't train it. You can train it to an extent. You have to instill it with a passion. So that's very important for us, and our Slow Life core purpose is very important. But what we found is that with some consumers, especially your Asian consumers, and your luxury consumers, there's this perception that if we're sustainable, we're not luxurious. And so quite often they say, oh, it's sustainable, they're talking too much about the sustainability angle. Let me just go to the Four Seasons or the Ritura or whatever, because I know that that's just going to be luxurious. So I might be making compromises. And so, but that's changing. And I think that's been our sort of challenge in a way, the dilemma between communicating our values, which are very important to us, both internally and externally as a brand, and to show that authenticity, whilst at the same time trying to convince our guests that because we are sustainable, we're also luxurious. And we've managed to do that. I mean, you know, we've won the equivalent of the Oscars in travel and tourism for sustainability, the World Travel and Tourism Council's Tourism for Tomorrow Award twice, and we've also won Condé Nast Traveler's Best the Best twice, you know, the UK version. So we've managed to do it, but it's the challenge with the consumer. And so our brand proposition is more about inspiring a lifetime of rare experiences. And I can show you some slides later if you'd like, or should we just flick some of those?
Sure. Can we go with slide one?
No, not
first?
one. Two onwards would be. Or I can show you one. It's an interesting point. So this is, whilst we're talking about one, we were touching upon it earlier. This is actually from the Future Laboratory, not the Future Foundation. It's another think tank, luxury think tank, and they were engaged by Lamborghini, and Lamborghini said, how relevant are the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, Indochina, to our market? And so they as a series of 125 interviews from various consumers, they realized that they were getting sort of answers all over the place, and from Chinese, Indians, Arabs, etc. And so what they felt was that there are 5 stages of luxury. The first stage is all about status. You make a bit of money and you use your wealth to show that you buy the white Rolls, etc. And stage 2 is all about brand and taste and discernment. And then stage 3, the cupboard's full, the garage is full, and it's all about experiences, ethical spirit. But so that's just an interesting thing about how the fast-changing Chinese consumer is going very much from stage 1 down to stage 3, 4, 5, and we're seeing that in India as well. And Russia in the last 20 years has been dramatic, the change. So Russia's actually a very big market for us because we're really focusing on stages 3, 4, and 5 in terms of consumers. So could you just flick the other slides and we can go on to other questions. But these are all about inspiring a lifetime of rare experiences. Sorry, I'll let someone else answer that.
Did you answer your question?
So, yeah.
I was actually just more curious about, you know, as the power dynamic shifts away from, you know, the more central hierarchical brand to the individual consumer, how are you guys grappling with that, you know, especially the brands that you run?
I mean, I think branding is, I have Charlotte here, head of our communications, was really important for Barneys because I think we relied very, very heavily on our past and very, very heavily on this idea of Barneys that was relevant like in the 90s, which a younger consumer could care less about. They didn't know what we were talking about, they're not interested. So it was really, the Barneys brand and the DNA of the brand was fantastic, but it wasn't really speaking to, so how do you again, let the past sort of not influence necessarily what we're trying to say today. Still there, still part of the DNA, but we worked very hard in really, exposing the brand to a completely different audience, and we have to keep doing that. It's very important.
Old Barney's store, right?
Yes,
But
that's a perfect example. And Charlotte actually fought very hard because everyone wanted to talk about the past, and fought very hard to make sure that the media covered also what was new about the store and the services and the things that didn't exist, 25 years ago. So you're 100% right.
Okay.
Is your coat part of your brand, part of your company?
Actually, the bag is
Okay.
I'd love to get your take if you
Look, I think you hit it already in the way you phrased your question, because for me, what the brand, and particularly, there's a difference in terms of life cycle and scale of brand as well. So, what I might look at and do for All Saints might be different were I to be owning Gucci, which that would be a much different challenge. The benefit of being smaller in size is that you're not. The kiss of death is to be all things to all people. I mean, you have to stay true to the brand's integrity and authenticity. The marketing, to me, particularly coming from the scale we're talking about, is incidental. How you communicate that message, particularly in today's world, if you've got good product at its core, if you've got good product and creativity and newness, this consumer, they will find you. All kinds of things just blow up because of that. But if you stray one iota, or you mislead one iota, whether it's pricing, whether it's product promises, whatever, you don't get a second chance with this consumer. So I think, to answer your question, the authenticity is everything. And then, there'll be a lot of different opinions on tactics and how you spend your marketing, and there are some businesses where a more traditional spend might be appropriate, but mostly it is in and around the digital space in terms of brands like we're talking about.
Hi, my name is Michael, and I'm in the luxury watch and jewelry business. And the big headwinds that we're feeling, the big disruptor right now, are the digital application of the parallel markets. I think the person who I have the most similar business with up there is Daniela. Is that correct? From
Yes.
Barney's. But we have a very difficult atmosphere in that our traditional customer that we built our business on for 40 years is cycling out. They need less stuff. They want, less Patek Philippe Rolex watches, and the consumer that's replacing them and will be in time, as I'm sure all of you have studied it, is the biggest consumer of our history. I'm not sure how much luxury they care about. They want to borrow things, share things, experience things, but do they want to own things? And if they do want to own things, is it luxury stuff? Is it luxury goods? And I just want to get some feedback from all of you, as in light of the disruption that's happening in the parallel market for multi-branders like myself. Three of you own your own brands. You can control the vertical very, very well. We can't, because so much of it is beyond our control. Where do you see, so the question is, how do you see the millennial luxury customer evolving?
Daniela, do you want to first tackle that?
I think that you're right. I think a younger consumer, millennial consumer, cares about a multitude of things. It isn't just luxury products. I think it's experience. I think as we've talked about, I think it's food. I think it's your digital presence, the content, all of that, which I think will influence them in terms of purchasing. But I don't think they're, you're right, as interested in just acquiring goods like some of our parents did. Just, more Rolexes, more Chanel bags, they don't think like that. But if they are going to make a purchase, I think they want it validated. They want to make sure that it fits with their lifestyle. And, I do think they will consume. I don't think that's going to go away. I think it's a part of their lifestyle. I don't think it's all about that. And in terms of the counterfeiting and the parallel, the brands need to be investing more in IP and counterfeit,
It's not the counterfeit part, it's just
the gray market.
The gray market is too much stuff
Right.
out there that's been overproduced, and that
Right. But the brands really have a responsibility to try to control that. And that, you know, I don't think a lot of brands are investing enough. We have the same problem. I mean, it's, you know, how these people get this merchandise, you know, is unclear. But it affects us as well. I don't know if anyone else has.
Does anybody else on the panel have anything to add? Because we have a lot of questions to get through still.
I don't know is the answer to that, because that is an unbelievably difficult challenge. You know, from a distribution perspective, we do face it in certain of our brands, but you know, if you don't have a disciplined brand that's going through your distribution, which in your industry is quite challenging, as I've looked at your industry closely. I don't know. It's a really, really tough one.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Yasmin Chihata. I have a lifestyle magazine business and events business in the Middle East. We target the high net worth Arab market. And my question for the panel is, there are still people who like to buy things full price to get them first, and you know, this very high-end consumer. But the problem, I think, and I see this in the US and in London too, is the way your companies put things on sale. Because the worst thing is for somebody to buy something full price and then see it a few months later put in a really crowded way, jammed into a sale rail, and you feel like, why did I pay all this money for it? Like, I think if you guys could protect the integrity of your products on sale, you'll find less people now willing to pay full price for it, because that happens to me. I mean, as a customer, I buy something full price, I see it 4 months later looking awful on sale, and I feel like I got ripped off. So a lot of people like that, we stop buying full price. We just wait, you know, till the sale. So I think if you guys could keep things looking just as beautiful and precious on sale as they do when they're full price, you know.
We try. We really try. I would say that come to Barney's during the sale period, and I think we do a better job than most. And really, the majority of our inventory actually does not go on sale. So you don't walk into our store and see, you know, every floor covered in sale racks, because we actually work very hard to mark down as, you know, little as possible. And we really try to keep sale to 4 weeks, and then we're gone. We don't keep it lingering for, you know, 2 months, 3 months until it's, you know, and circulated amongst, you know, each of the stores. We don't do that. So I agree with you. I completely agree with you. It's hard. It's a very hard thing to manage, and I think that, you know, protecting the integrity of the product is something that American retailers need to go back to doing.
Yeah, and I think as Lyndon touched upon earlier, I think one needs to try and avoid going into a vicious circle, and that's a terrible vicious circle. It gets worse and worse. Yeah.
It's all very easy in theory, though.
Right.
It is.
And when you're sitting on the street and you're not on sale, and the rest, and we've done this, and the rest of your peer group has broken, because, you know, the first guy that breaks thinks he gets the advantage because people go to him. So the first guy breaks, effectively the street breaks, and you're sitting there. Just look at the traffic patterns. Your store's empty. So, you know, I agree 100%, and I've done it, but there is a balance, there is a game that you have to play, inevitably, because the market is what it is. And, you know, it's just basic economic theory, right? You know, that first guy, we're all sitting there with full price. That first guy that goes thinks he's grabbing market share. Ultimately, he's bringing the market down. But that's the way it's been for forever. And to get everybody to hold ranks, first of all, it's illegal. But you know, secondly, it's impractical.
Price collusion is illegal. Do we have another question? We only have 2 minutes left, and we have to go ahead. Let's try to do both then.
I have a quick question. There's been a lot of discussion about pricing, and as it relates to millennials, which are driving a lot of demand and forecasting. What about the other issues of transparency that millennials clearly care about, which would be practices of manufacturing and manufacturers, and your responsibility as global retailers or retailers? My 16-year-old daughter won't buy anything made by little hands, quote unquote. So things like that. She and her friends are not unique. So
that's part of what I was trying to refer to when I talk about authenticity, and the access to information. The consumer, the millennial consumer, you almost can't mark. I mean, you can, but you can't market to them because they see through the message. They're looking at authenticity. They're looking at, you know, what does the product stand for? Where is it made? You know, what's its fabrication? And you know, it's just you lose the authenticity if you're not socially responsible. And that's why I think a lot of the growth, I was saying on the way into the room, you know, not to, you know, be too controversial, but I'd hate to hold the cards of somebody like a Procter & Gamble or, you know, right now, because so many of the products, you know, just through legacy, have different issues with them, whether, you know, the contains chemicals, this, that, you know, and so the natural, you know, the health and wellness movement is eating share quickly, and the question is, can the big companies turn their entire supply chain and product and cash flow machine quick enough to address that? And I suspect the answer is probably not.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add to that point is, we spend a lot of time like really building the values of our company and really passing the message along to our franchisees, to our sales reps, and I strongly agree with the question and the message. I just, you know, like it's very hard to bring consumers if we are not a company that really walk the talk, right? And I think we have to make sure not only the brand and the products are, you know, talking to the millennials, but we are, as a company management, also believe in the same values as they do.
Quickly, I'm going to try to get in your question.
Thank you. I'm Cameron Saul. I run a British sustainable luxury sort of fashion accessory brand. My question was to you, Lyndon. You mentioned that with All Saints, wholesale isn't part of the equation, and I wondered, firstly, why, and secondly, is that part of a wider trend that you're seeing with brands that are holding back from perhaps wholesale and focusing more on own mono-brand retail and online?
Yeah, and I think it does vary a little bit regionally, and you know, we have the luxury of that at All Saints today. I want to control brand and brand experience, and the sad truth is that in a market, in a world that is dictated by price competition and whatnot, I can't legally control the wholesale market in terms of what they do with my product. I can create incentives and structures and all the rest of it, but ultimately, if they want to clear it, you know, it's up to them. And you know, I also I find it very difficult. Actually, let me switch quickly. I show you an example of frozen food in France. I had two businesses at the same time, actually shared many of the same supply chain characteristics. One sold through supermarkets, the other only sold its own product in its own retail. One ended up struggling and going dramatically backwards because I couldn't get the retailer to position and present the message to the consumer of, you know, what the product stood for. Whereas the other one has been in rapid growth for years and years and years because I control my own distribution. So it is preferable to control our own distribution, or at least significantly influence it. It's not easy, though, to do that when you're starting you know, a young brand, because wholesale is what typically gives you the cash flow to go ahead and start doing stores. But it does enable us to control brand and the experience and the message, and which is, you know, critical to me. But there's a limit to that. You know, if I were Gucci, I couldn't do that, because, you know, their scale is just too big and they got to feed the machine. Yeah. I can do that at All Saints.
Okay, with that, we've run over, but I want to thank our panelists today for their enthusiasm and their engagement. Thank you. And one of the mandates of the Milken Institute is that hopefully you learned something from this panel. I want to thank everyone for the education. Thank you.